The rain poured steadily against the windows, casting a soothing rhythm through the dimly lit house. I sat at the kitchen table, idly stirring a mug of hot chocolate, the steam curling into faint wisps. Across from me, my younger brother sat, his head tilted slightly as he watched me. There was something in his eyes, curiosity mixed with concern, that made me look away. "Are you okay?" he asked, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, hesitant, as though he feared the answer. "I'm fine," I replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Why wouldn't I be?" He shrugged, his fingers tracing idle patterns on the table. "I don't know. You've been different lately." "Quiet," I sighed, setting the mug down. He wasn't wrong. The past few weeks had left me emotionally drained, but I wasn't about to dump my baggage on him. "It's nothing," I said lightly. "Just tired." He didn't look convinced, but he let it go, shifting the conversation to lighter topics. We talked about school, the latest shows he was obsessed with, and our parents' trip out of town. His laughter filled the room, a sound so genuine it almost made me forget the weight in my chest. But beneath the surface, an unease lingered. Being alone with him for the weekend felt strange, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the way he seemed so grown up all of a sudden, no longer the little boy who used to follow me around. After dinner, we sat in the living room, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. He pulled out an old board game, and for a while, it felt like we were kids again. His competitive streak made me laugh, and for a moment, the tension inside me eased. "You know," he said suddenly, his tone more serious, "you don't have to pretend with me." I froze, the playful atmosphere evaporating in an instant. "What do you mean?" "You're hurting," he said simply, his gaze steady. "And it's okay. You don't have to hide it." Something in his words struck a chord deep within me. I wanted to deny it, to push him away, but the kindness in his eyes made it impossible. "It's complicated," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. "Everything is," he said with a small smile. "But I'm here, if you ever want to talk." His words lingered long after he had gone to bed. Alone in the quiet of the house, I found myself replaying our conversation. He was right, I was hurting. But sharing that pain with him felt like crossing an invisible line, one I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The rain continued to fall outside, a steady reminder of the storm both inside and out. As I stared out the window, I realized that this weekend would be anything but ordinary. Something was shifting between us, something I didn't yet understand. The storm knocked out the power not long after dinner, plunging the house into darkness except for the faint glow of a few candles we hurriedly lit. The air felt heavier, charged with something beyond the weather, as we sat together in the living room. "What now?" he asked, breaking the silence as he spun the candle holder between his fingers. "Guess we waited out," I said, leaning back against the couch. He laughed softly. "Feels like one of those old ghost stories you used to tell me when we were kids. Except now you're the one who looks scared." "I'm not scared," I replied, though my tone lacked conviction. The truth was, I wasn't afraid of the dark. It was the stillness, the closeness, the way he seemed to see right through me that unnerved me. "Okay," he said with a knowing smile. "How about we talk then? You used to love doing that." I hesitated but nodded. There wasn't much else to do, and a part of me was grateful for the distraction. "What do you want to talk about?" He tilted his head, considering. "Why don't you tell me what's really been going on with you?" I froze for a moment, caught off guard by the directness of his question. "I told you, it's nothing." "You don't have to lie to me," he said softly. "I can tell you're not okay. And that's fine. I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this." His words hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I debated brushing him off again, but something in his expression, earnest, almost pleading, made me stop. "It's complicated," I finally admitted. "There's a lot." "Like what?" He pressed gently. I took a deep breath, staring at the flickering flame between us. "Someone I trusted hurt me. Betrayed me, actually. I thought they cared, but I was just a placeholder for something better." The words spilled out before I could stop them, each one pulling a weight off my chest. I avoided his gaze, afraid of what I might see, but his voice was steady when he replied. That's not on you, he said firmly. People like that, they don't deserve you. A bitter laugh escaped me. Easy to say, when you're not the one who has to pick up the pieces. I get it, he said, his voice softer now. More than you think. You feel broken, like you'll never be enough. But you are. And anyone who can't see, that isn't worth your time. I looked at him then, surprised by the intensity in his tone. There was something raw in his eyes, a vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. You've been through something too, haven't you? I asked quietly. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement.
Yeah, but this isn't about me.
It's about you. And I need you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here. The sincerity in his voice shook me. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen, understood. It was a strange, fragile comfort, and I wasn't sure what to do with it. The storm raged on outside, but inside, something had shifted. The walls I'd built around myself felt weaker, and his presence, steady and unyielding, was impossible to ignore. The night stretched on longer than expected, and the weight of the conversation still lingered between us. We were sitting in silence now, the only sound the crackling of the candle flames. My mind raced with thoughts I didn't know how to process, and the storm outside only amplified the sense of chaos inside. I tried to push the conversation aside, to move on, but I couldn't ignore the shift between us. His words, his concerns, something about it felt too personal, too intimate. I could feel his gaze on me, the tension in the air thick and undeniable. You don't have to keep pretending, he said after what felt like an eternity. His voice was quiet, almost fragile. I see it, you know, the way you look at me sometimes. I know it's not just because I'm your little brother. I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and my breath caught in my throat. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Was I imagining things? Or had he actually just said what I thought he said? You don't understand, I said quickly, trying to cover up the panic that surged inside me. That's not what this is. It's just been a hard time, okay? But he wasn't backing down. His eyes were locked on mine, and the intensity of his stare made me feel exposed, vulnerable. I don't think you understand, he said slowly, his voice soft but resolute. I see how much you're hurting. I know you think it's all about someone else, but I'm here too. I've always been here. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just sat there, staring at him, unable to look away. His next words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt it too, he admitted. The way I depend on you, the way I look at you. It's not just because you're my sister. I don't know when it started, but it's always been more. I've always wanted to protect you. My pulse quickened, my mind racing. What was he saying? Did he mean what I thought he meant? The boundaries between us that I had once believed were so clear seemed to blur before my eyes. You don't know what you're saying, I whispered, my voice trembling. I wanted to push him away, to tell him that this was wrong, but a part of me, one I couldn't quite silence, was drawn to him in a way that confused me more than I could admit. He shook his head. I know exactly what I'm saying. And I don't want you to push me away, not now. The words hung in the air like a thick fog, and for the first time, I realized that what we were talking about wasn't just an accident, wasn't just a fleeting moment. Something had changed between us, something I couldn't unsee or forget. I didn't mean for this to happen, I said quietly, my voice cracking. I know you didn't, he replied, his voice just as soft. But it's happening now. And I can't ignore it anymore. My heart was racing, my head spinning. The emotional distance that had once felt so secure between us was gone, replaced by something else, something dangerous, something that felt like betrayal. I stood abruptly, shaking my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I don't know what to do with this, I whispered. I can't. But my words trailed off as I realized that there was no easy way to fix this, no way to go back to the way things were. What we had just said to each other couldn't be undone. The line we had crossed couldn't be uncrossed. He didn't follow me as I walked away, but I could feel his eyes on me, the weight of his confession still hanging in the air. And as I lay awake that night, alone in the dark, I knew this was only the beginning of something I wasn't ready to face. The morning after our conversation, the house felt eerily quiet. I could feel the distance between us, thick and suffocating, even though we hadn't spoken a word since the night before. The unease settled in my chest like a heavy weight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed forever. I found myself staring at the phone in my hand, the screen flashing with a message from my ex. I hadn't responded to any of their texts over the past week, but now the temptation to reach out was unbearable. I could almost hear their voice in my head, the promises they had made, the ones they had broken. I wanted to respond, to say something that would give me closure, something that would fix everything inside me that felt shattered. But I hesitated, my finger hovering over the keyboard. At that moment, my younger brother appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice hesitant but steady. I put the phone down quickly, feeling a pang of guilt. "Yeah," I lied, my gaze shifting away from him. "Just thinking." "You don't have to pretend," he said, stepping closer. His eyes were serious, the weight of last night's words still between us. I felt a flicker of frustration stir within me. "I don't know what you want me to say. What's happening between us? It's not something I can just forget." He nodded, but his expression softened. "I get it. I'm not asking you to forget. I don't know how to fix this," I admitted quietly, my voice breaking. "What we said, it can't just go away." "It doesn't have to," he said, his tone surprisingly calm. "But we have to face it. We can't ignore it anymore." The words hit me harder than I expected. Part of me wanted to run, to shut him out completely, but another part of me wanted to hold on to him, to believe that this wasn't the end. "I never meant for it to go this far," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," he replied, his voice gentle. "But we can't keep pretending it doesn't matter. I care about you, and I think you care about me too. That's not something we can just ignore." The silence stretched between us, heavy and thick. I knew he was right. This wasn't something that could be easily brushed aside. But I didn't know how to move forward, how to handle what we had said to each other, how to fix the line that had been crossed. "I don't want to lose you," I said, the words coming out more desperately than I intended. "You won't lose me," he said firmly. "But we both need to figure out what this really means. I'm not going anywhere." I stared at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning of something new, something that would require both of us to grow. That afternoon, I found myself staring at the unsent message from my ex again. The urge to reach out still pulsed in my chest, but this time, I didn't type a response. Instead, I deleted the message, erasing the last thread that had tied me to the past. It wasn't about closure anymore. It was about moving forward, facing the truth of what had happened, and what I was willing to do next. As the day went on, I realized that the real closure had come from the conversation with my brother. It wasn't about making everything okay instantly. It was about accepting what had been said, accepting the change, and figuring out how to move forward from there. When we spoke again later, the tension had faded, replaced by something else. Understanding, maybe even forgiveness. We didn't need to say much. We simply understood. And that in itself was enough. In the end, we had both learned something about boundaries, about love, and about the strength found in facing our feelings head-on. And as the rain finally stopped, the silence between us felt different. Calmer, quieter, but more certain.